I decided not to use PowerPoints. There I am with my market. So what I thought I would do is just share a few observations from what we're working on, and then have a conversation that we can carry on into the panel. First, a little bit about us. If you don't know the Bureau of Economic Geology, you should. We're the State Geological Survey. We're also the largest research program at the University of Texas. My boss, Scott Tinker, is the state geologist. I'm the chief energy economist inside the Bureau. And this was a little bit of inside Texas merger and acquisition activity that happened a few years ago. My group had been part of the University of Houston for about 15 years, and then we got an offer to switch hats, colors, mascots, and so on. But we stayed here in Houston because we're all Houstonians, and none of us wanted to move to Austin because Houston's better. Yeah. In many, many, many respects, Houston is actually a very great place to be. Our team works on energy value chain economics. We start upstream. We go all the way down to the burner tip. Traditionally, we kind of stopped at the power burner tip. Over the past 3 years, we have been working hard to try to understand better industrial use of liquids and methane, because that matters in terms of the regional economy and also the industrial base of the United States. We have a very active website that we're in the process of rebuilding, and what I'll do at some point is we'll try to do something to post the website up there so that you all can get it, because we've got a lot of research that's posted. What we started to do over the past couple of years is post work in progress as what we call snapshots. So there's a lot of provocative stuff on the website right now that deals with upstream economics, power in Texas, our industrial analysis, industrial demand analysis, and a lot of other things. Apart from what my team does, we interact within a 200-person organization at the Bureau. We have geoscientists that know the state really well, all the major gas and oil and gas plays, people who have done a really good job for many years of defining everything from West Texas geology to all of the emerging prospective areas. That's the role that the Bureau has historically played as the survey. And one of the specific things that we try to do is partner with companies to help them with regional studies that will enhance their chances of success. This, of course, benefits the state in terms of production, revenue collections, and so on. The Bureau has always done this as the state survey. Most state surveys tend to follow that kind of model, focusing on activity inside the state and trying to push geoscience research in the direction that the industry really needs. When we arrived on the scene, what we added to that was the commercialization side. What does the state need to think about, and what do we all need to be thinking about when it comes to pathways to markets, field to market linkages, pipelines, storage, processing, fractionation, export facilities, if that's what somebody wants to do, conversion to electric power, which raises all of the questions on the electric power market and how it functions, and then the industrial base. So that's all now within the Bureau and available not only for the state of Texas, our colleagues in the different agencies that we work with and support, but also to the public at large. My team's existed for a really long time. We started out as the Natural Gas Project at the University of Houston, so we're very natural gas oriented. We've been very international in scope. We've worked in about 25 countries over the years. We've hosted people for programs and for other activities from another, 20 or so. We've collaborated with international multilateral institutions. We've done work with the World Bank, in particular on national oil companies, which is something to think about these days, as well as our industry partners. One of the things that we were looking for, in fact, at the time that the Bureau approached us, was a better situation for an academically based research program that really wants to help industry. Believe me, it is not easy to do these days. to run a program that has Exxon as your donor. And of course, the very first thing that happened when we joined UT was a Freedom of Information Act request for our list of donors, and what exactly did we do with ExxonMobil, which was right up there at the top of the list. I tend to not worry about that kind of stuff, because if we don't have a healthy energy business and an energy industry, then I'm not sure that we have that much to support our, whatever we are these days, $14 or $17 trillion U.S. economy, right? So we tend to be pretty thick-skinned and not very responsive to criticism about where our money comes from. We're objective. We tell companies what we think. If they aren't happy with research outcomes that we're getting from what they're funding, we'll explain to them you know, what we're thinking, what the assumptions are, and work with them to better understand the results. And we're kind of going through that right now on a really sensitive case study on gas demand in China, which everyone in every forecast on Earth thinks will use natural gas very aggressively. But as you start peeling away the layers of the onion, it's very tough to see how that is going to happen exactly. It's a very complex country and a very complicated energy sector and a really complicated natural gas value chain. So that's us. JC asked me to kind of kick off the evening in our discussion about offshore developments, oil markets, and kind of where things are heading today. So the best way for me to do this is to actually tell you about my day. I started off with the Norwegians this morning as the keynote speaker for the delegation for their breakfast. I've done this for international delegations before. It's always interesting being with the Norwegians. I've been to the country many times. We've done training programs there, conferences. I have lots of research colleagues. And the Norwegian view of the world is always very clear and very rosy and very optimistic, which is easy to be and do when you're sitting on top of $900 billion in a sovereign wealth fund, right? And nobody else pretty much is. And you're a very nice, cozy, homogenous country and population. But I was with Kevin McAvoy, who's the CEO of Oceaneering. One of my past experiences was to work a couple of buildings down for Simmons & Company International. We actually, when I was there, helped put pieces of Oceaneering together. And I've been having deja vu all over the place. Once oil prices finally started to drop, I've been kind of waiting for this to happen for about 2 years. Various delays and various things that kind of worked against my own outlook, but now we're there. And I've been having deja vu to the 1980s, late 80s, when I was at Simmons, and we were trying to figure out how to keep the oil service industry alive, basically. What parts of it could be salvaged, how to combine and consolidate around the emerging technologies. There were a lot of big bets that were placed in those days. The most interesting transaction that I worked on when I was at Simmons was the Baker Hughes acquisition of Eastman Christensen, and that actually was the dawn of real-time, flexible, horizontal, lateral drilling with information that allowed people to actually really enter the unconventional plays the way they have today. But at the time that we did that, what Baker Hughes was trying to do was stay alive, reconstitute itself, and pick up and make strategic acquisitions that could carry them into the future. And I don't think they actually ever thought about the significance of that transaction. So that's kind of lesson number one, is I'm sitting there listening to Kevin with all of this fantastic stuff. Oceaneering won 2 prizes at the OTC this year, mainly for robotics, for subsea pipeline management, and consolidated satellite control information systems for subsea operations. Really inventive stuff that they're looking at for maintaining hulls on FPSOs. Really cool stuff. And the first kind of big lesson is that you never know what's going to come out of price disruptions. And some of it is actually really interesting and will be disruptive itself in terms of the later cycles and all of that. And that was a really kind of a nice thing to see up front. My next stop today was on a panel for the Next Wave program, which has been an experiment by, mainly by the SPE and the partner professional groups to try to reach out to the younger professionals who tend to come into OTC, who are going to develop into full-fledged members, senior managers, hopefully, of their companies. And so Next Wave is a forum for both professional, but also personal career interests. And of course, all the questions today, as I suspected they would be, were related to where did we think prices were going to head, how did we think the industry was going to restructure itself, and what the consequences would be to the people in the audience, their jobs, their lives, and all of that sort of thing. I sat next to a guy from Log, a private company in Louisiana that is operating a deep water facility that has just gone online. We know that the offshore has been diversifying in participation. We know that private companies have been stepping out beyond the shelf and into deeper waters in various ways, although I actually didn't think that anyone was moving into a multi-billion-dollar operating position, but there you are, that's what they're doing. We also know that the funds are coming into deep water projects and helping to capitalize them, and in some cases taking very significant interest. So the Blackstones, Carlyles, and so on are very much in that space. This guy had the best 25 words or less introduction that I've ever heard someone receive. Hi, this is, I can't remember his name, I'll share it later, from Log, who just brought on Devil's Chest into production in the Gulf of Mexico. Boy, what a neat thing to be able to say as your bio today. So I decided I want to change careers. I need to do something besides just running models and writing reports, and actually, do something useful for society. So lesson number 2. This is an amazing business that we have in the United States that everyone always underestimates in terms of how it reinvents itself, who shows up, how people tap into funding to pursue good ideas, the diversity of participants, and the ability to raise money to be able to move forward with something like this project in this environment, which is not only a price-challenged environment, it's been a concept-challenged environment for months, for years, in monitoring U.S. oil and gas activity. I will tell you, is past investment banker sort of novice. If you showed up anywhere and talked about anything other than a shale play, out the door. Nobody was interested, they didn't understand it, they weren't going to try to analyze it, because equity analysts are generalists and nobody understands the oil and gas business anyway. What they love about the shale business is that they can look at the 20 companies that operate in whatever basin and run through the corporate reports and do the metrics and tell the institutional investors what they think. That, in all honesty, is the shale factory in the United States. It's the equity research side of the business. So the mere fact that a private company from Louisiana, I'm proud to say as a South Louisianan, will show up and take on a project like this and raise the money and get it done, I think is a testament to a real, very, very tough thing for everyone to get their arms around, but a really important thing, which is that we can't predict how the industry is going to restructure itself or reshape itself and respond in the future. Neither can the Saudis or the Kuwaitis or the Emiratis. They don't have a better crystal ball on this than any of the rest of us do, for sure. In fact, they're disadvantaged because they're not here and they don't understand how the U.S. market works anyway. So we have to be prepared for the unexpected, both in terms of what happens technology-wise, industry response, and look for the opportunities. Where are our talents going to be most needed? What do people need to know to be able to pursue their business interests and push into these new plays? The third thing that I wanted to add to all of this is just kind of a comment that came up in the course of conversations today. So this just goes to the oil price path that we're all looking at. trying to understand. And I think most of us in the room, this is maybe our third or fourth time around
Yeah.
on that. So I don't know about some of you, but actually in 2011, I gave my team, my research team, a really low flat oil price deck after some work with Oxford University that I felt we needed to consider as a stress test, a case for the U.S. producers and for our own markets here. It turns out that oil price deck wasn't low enough. I was off by about 15 bucks. But the general idea is still there that we could be in basically a 1990s type era of a real attempt to try to protect market share, but with a real eye to what oil price needs to be to attract customers, which I think is the fundamental driver in all of this. If you think about it, when we came off of the 2008 bubble, the Chinese bubble, and right around as the recession hit, which was convenient for a lot of reasons, there was no reason for oil price to go back up again after that. We would be in the $70 territory that everyone is struggling to try to figure out now in those days. And if you recall, what happened was Tunisia and the flowering of things that ultimately became the Arab Spring, the phrase that nobody wants to use, and a lot of official selling price management to try to make sure that there was enough revenue to the governments to get through those situations. And that stuck around for a while. But if you're a customer and you're paying somebody else's premium for their own internal stability priorities, after a while, you get kind of tired of doing that. And I think that's basically what's been going on, is an adjustment in price to respond to a very real situation, which is that you can drive away your customers. You're selling oil, a fossil fuel, in a world which is virulently anti-fossil fuel to begin with, and you're trying to make sure that you are selling your product in an optimal way, earning revenues back in an optimal way, and the price is working against you, so something has to happen. It's very convenient to point the fingers over here to us and say that our shale players were the problem, but that's not really it at all. It's a much more fundamental, just supply-demand balance dilemma, with a few other things thrown in for fun, like Russia, Iran, or other colorful stuff to sort of make it interesting. So if you think about it that way, we should have started to think really seriously about what price environment we would have been in much sooner than we are today, but here we are. The unfortunate thing that happened, I think, is that after 2010, given the contracting world, large project cost inflation and problems with schedule management and all sorts of other things, it's going to be a lot harder to achieve the kinds of efficiencies and cost reductions that everybody is hoping to do than it might have been a few years ago when we actually had the recession working in favor and maybe helping a little bit. But that's hindsight, and there's nothing we can do about that. So those are my three major points for contemplation. Point number one, people are inventive. There's a huge amount of stuff going on technologically. Companies like Oceaneering are really looking for ways and things that they can do to help the operators manage through all of this, with a $70 price in mind. Kevin was very frank about that this morning. The second thing is the diversity of participants, the people who step out and go into different plays, how they put deals together, like the log example, Offshore, is just incredible to think about, and the enabling technology for that is really cool. And then the third one, why are we here in the first place? What we really need to be thinking about in terms of oil prices, which is that we've got to really devote ourselves as people who are interested in petroleum economics to the fundamentals, because ultimately they win out. You can try to fake the market as long as you want, but sooner or later fundamentals win out. And if supply and demand aren't right, or if there's something that's not good from an oil consumption point of view or a customer point of view, it will manifest itself, and people have to figure out how to deal with that. Okay, is that good? To start off? Sorry? Thank you. Okay. Wonderful. Now what?
I don't know. Do you guys have any questions?
Are there questions, points of discussion, disagreement, complaints, arguments?
One question, you mentioned industrial user analysis. Is that state or regional or global, or how far are you guys extending?
It's national.
National.
So we're looking across the United States. The sad thing is that the majority of the CapEx and the project development is here on the Gulf Coast. I say sad because we keep looking for signs of life that somewhere in the Marcellus region, those states will get their act together and create attractive investment opportunities for downstream, and they just can't seem to do that. So several of the projects that are getting developed here are being developed by companies that also looked at sites in Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and so on, and decided that the Gulf Coast was the place to be. I would have preferred to actually see some things happen up there, because I feel like we've got a two-tiered economy anyway in the United States. It's old industrial heartland versus the Sun Belt, which is kind of what seems to be happening. So we've been trying to do a ground-up bit of research. We have a database that we've been building, looking at projects and parameters. It's on our website. You can see some of the information that we've been producing. I will say that our industrial demand, and it's not huge, but our industrial demand outlook is more robust than the EIA's outlook. So we're kind of having some interesting dialogues with them. Likewise, I should mention that on the geoscience side at the Bureau, for several years now, we've been working on a shale resource assessment funded by Sloan Foundation. And so it is an independent look at the resource space. And of course, you can slice and dice things different ways depending on how you choose to set your economics. But we have gas supply rolling over more quickly than EIA does too. So we're kind of having adventures inside my shop trying to figure out how we're going to handle supply-demand balances for natural gas and going forward. Yep.
Two-part question. Can you give me your assessment of the anti-fracking movement, and also your assessment of earthquakes caused by produced water injection?
Oklahoma is prone to earthquakes. Wow. That shouldn't be, that's a joke. That shouldn't be news for the geologists in the room. People have known that Oklahoma is prone to earthquakes for a long time. It's just that injection wells happen to be inconveniently close to a lot of the fault zones. So we've been looking a little bit at induced seismicity, and I think the jury is kind of out on that. But I think fundamentally what anyone will tell you is we don't know where the fault systems are. So if an agency is trying to permit injection wells and you're giving operators go-aheads to locate injection wells in certain places, and yes, the fault zones are deeper, they're in the basement, but you don't know what may be going on. That there's kind of that train of thought. If we knew better how the subsurface looked in terms of some of these mid-continent faulting areas, we might be able to think a bit about what the risk factors might be. Now, beyond that, it's getting blown out of proportion. So, I mean, that's the problem with all of this. And then on the fracking debate and all of that, suffice it to say, I think a cool down in prices is actually a good thing to allow cooler heads to prevail on that front, because when we were at the peak and getting called in to talk at every frac conference on Earth and making movies to counteract gasoline and all of that crazy stuff, that's not the best use of resources in my view. It's a waste of time. It turns out that what people actually really care about anyway is not that. They cared about and do care about trucks and congestion and road repair and dust and emissions and unsafe truck drivers and lots of concerns about unsafe truck drivers. And those are the real community concerns. And what I think, just sort of what's happened, my own theory, I have no proof of this, but it would stand to reason. those basic community concerns are easy to co-opt by environmental groups in the anti-frack space. When in fact, it's not that the local communities are opposed to activity, they just want it to be a little better managed. You know, that's the major issue.
I'd like to offer a couple minutes on the injection side of things. I grew up in Denver and went to the School of Mines in 74 to 80. So the Denver earthquakes, you know, were very, very much on our minds then. And a professor of geophysics by the name of Maurice Major had a couple of theories going on at the time. One of them was lubrication of faults was the primarily one that they had. The Coors beer can experiment in front of the state legislature really kind of did that one. But the problem was that the three biggest quakes that hit Denver, the magnitude 5.1, 5.3, 5.4, were after the well had been capped. Shortly after it was capped, 6 months after it was capped, 12 months after it was capped. And, you know, the U.S. Army, who ran the Rocky Mountain Arsenal, you know, said, it wasn't us. You got a seismometer right on top of the well. You can tell. You know, we aren't pumping down there. And when I was in school, you know, Major was saying that it's possible that these were all coincidences, but the longer that this has gone on and it hasn't continued, there is another theory. There was 180 million gallons of wastewater pushed down this well in the span of about 18 months. Thermal contraction could be part of the issue. So that you had the small quakes as you were cooling down the rock. And after you stopped cooling it down, it started to expand again. And the big quakes happened during the re-warming of the rock. If you looked at Rangeley, if you look at another one in southeastern Colorado where you have induced seismicity, they were all not from the pressure, but from the sheer volume of water you were putting down the wells. And if that is indeed the cause, well, then it's a real simple solution. Okay, don't put that much water down any single one well, or spread it out. Anyway, it's a theory, but but since we had talked about it.
Well, lots of research groups are working on that. I think that's a space to be watched, and I think the most constructive thing that'll come out of it will maybe be some state funding for mapping fault zones in Texas, which we've been trying to do for a long, long, long time. And this would be useful to communities anyway, just from a geohazards point of view for construction and other things. Yeah.
So just going off of that on the environmental issue, what are your thoughts on sort of the policy issues or lack of distinct policy in environmental questions in areas like Texas or North Dakota that really aren't regulating much, or maybe not as much as it should, you know, disposal wells or trucking or other things like that. It's sort of it's getting better, but it's, you know, started as sort of a free-for-all. You can do whatever you want, and it's really not at the point where it's very heavily regulated now either. That's upsetting local communities, as you mentioned. What are your thoughts on that? What direction is that taking? Do you think we should do more? Do you think we should do less? Do you think it doesn't matter?
I don't know that it's an answer of more, because I don't like more regulation just for the sake of regulation anyway, than to just not like that. I also think there's a really powerful regulator out there, which is the marketplace. So if you're a publicly traded company and things happen, you suffer the consequences sooner or later. Even if you're a private company and you're a poor operator, you're going to suffer the consequences. Brand management and brand reputation and ability to warehouse risks is a really important thing in the business these days. And institutional investors in particular scrutinize stuff. So if you're trying to win institutional funding for things, that's a pretty powerful regulator. So I'm not actually sure how much the states need to do beyond making sure that best practice is encouraged and everybody should, try to do things consistently once you understand what best practice is. And if anything, there may be some things that we don't understand well enough about best practice. But I think that people who have drilled and completed wells a lot kind of know what that is, and then it becomes a question of, is everybody actually doing things the way that they should? So I'm not, it's hard to think about what needs to be done at the local level. The big complaint in our state has been an inadequate redistribution of funds from the state to the counties that are affected. I think that's a valid complaint. And I think a lot of the stuff that we've been seeing in terms of like local decisions and the ruckus now on how much say the state should have over the ability of local municipalities to ban drilling and other activities or not. I think a lot of that would have been alleviated with a recognition that the host communities that are bearing the brunt of the problem, if they're not actually getting the resources they need to deal with it, then that's not square. And you have to fix that somehow. This is an old problem. Everybody deals with it in the commodities businesses, extractive industries. How do you deal with local impacts? There's an enormous body of work and experimentation as people have tried to deal with that. Likewise, the counties have responsibilities to try to foster decent infrastructure that will allow them to be more competitive for economic development. And in at least one case that we looked at, road funds had been mismanaged. It's a county problem. That's not, a problem related with oil and gas activity or state funding. It's a problem of mismanagement in the county that needs to be addressed the right way. So to a certain extent, a lot of times those kinds of problems creep into the picture and you have to kind of sort out what it is. Now, all of that said, we're watching how the BLM proposed rules play out psychologically, publicly, politically, and of course what everyone is concerned about is whether some portion of what the Department of Interior is proposing, things that seem maybe a bit over the top, actually creep into state rules in the states that don't have BLM lands, but where the states might be inclined to or under pressure to take the Department of Interior recommendations as best practice. And that's just something that we have to watch. I don't think that anybody thinks that coming out of all of this as easy an environment in terms of regulatory scrutiny as perhaps they were before, because things do need to run well. It's to nobody's benefit if people are so unhappy that they'll vote to ban activity in states where clearly the resources are needed not only for the state economies but for the national economy as well. So somebody's got to do something about that. That's for sure.
Still right now,
Oh, okay.
we're gonna do the panel.
Okay.
And people are free to ask you as well questions on offshore and whatever.